Good evening. My name is Casey Rabideau, and I am an occupational therapist practicing in the state of New Hampshire. I am a constituent in District 1, Stratford County, coming specifically to you from the town of Lee. As an occupational therapist, I work with children and adolescents birth to 22 years old. My clients are diverse, often complex, usually excited to engage in OT, and live within your communities. I am also a clinical assistant professor at the University of New Hampshire. Through this role, I work hard to train and propel the next generation of pediatric OTs. I'm also a lifelong learner and am continuing my studies as an occupational therapy student within MGH's IHP's post-professional occupational therapy doctoral program. My work with the IHP has driven my interest in public policy, professional advocacy, and community outreach within our state. This video is a call to action for you, for me, for our neighbors next door, our representatives down the street, and ultimately to our state at large. In February 2020, the HEW 589, New Hampshire's Medicaid to School proposed bill, was officially enacted into law. This policy outlined how Medicaid reimbursable services would be provided by New Hampshire school districts and administrative units. For stakeholders in the education sector, this was a tremendous moment in history. Unfortunately, since it's been indoctrinated, there have been significant barriers to implementation, and thus not all districts and subsequently not all students have been afforded equal benefit under this law. It's important for listeners to understand that Medicaid to Schools is not just happening in the state of New Hampshire. Medicaid to School is based on federal policy initiatives, which provide upwards of $4 to $5 billion in funding to our education system each year. Although this is not the intent of this video, listeners are encouraged to follow up on federal policy to better understand this state level request. A few key stakeholders here in case you're interested in further education. This is really a multidisciplinary conversation and truly impacts the micro and macro level functioning of our schools. Under the New Hampshire Medicaid to Schools initiative, implications exist for occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech-language pathology, as well as the many other people listed here today. We all take stake in this policy. With billions of dollars coming in, you may be thinking, what's the problem? Our schools are funded, our students are funded. Unfortunately, and very simply put, the vastness of the federal policy and the individualized nature of state-specific dissemination has led to many questions and fallouts with implementation. New Hampshire has worked hard to set up the internal resources such as those listed here today. This is a great place to start if you're interested in this endeavor, to educate yourself and familiarize yourself with the many intricacies of this policy. One of the main barriers is truly administrative burden, the burden that comes when applying to become a covered school and to adhering to the lengthy compliance requirements. As a voluntary program, some schools are simply saying, no, it's not worth it for us. This is a problem. When policy that is intended to facilitate a positive change actually leads to additional hardship, we must continue to modify and adapt. Let me continue to paint a little closer picture. An example of this administrative burden is the requirement for a referring provider, an order coming from a physician or an equivalent provider, to initiate occupational, physical, or speech therapy services. In other words, an OT like myself is allowed to evaluate a child, but they cannot initiate a plan of care without a direct and detailed order if they want to receive Medicaid reimbursement. This is cumbersome, costly, and runs the risk of delay in care for some of our most vulnerable populations. Such coordination requires the expense of hiring or contracting with a referring provider and may not be feasible for all districts, particularly those in rural parts of our states or with considerably lower socioeconomic resources. This is simply unfair and inequitable. This problem runs deeper when we consider OT specifically and our updated Practice Act within the state of New Hampshire. Under Section 326C2 of the 2023 revised statutes, OTs do not require referrals to provide services. This is, of course, subject to payer requirements, but highlights a discrepancy which further complicates these decisions for schools across our state. One regulatory document is stating that we do not need a referral, but another states that we do. We must bridge these gaps in communication in order to move policy forward. If you are sitting on this session tonight and still not empowered to jump in, I'd like to challenge you to think a little more globally. Schools have a unique capacity to promote accessibility and facilitate health equity across the state. If we can provide early screening, supports, and services to some of our most in need students, research suggests improved long-term outcomes. Investing in our children is an investment in our future. Medicaid to schools is federally funded but state managed. Your voice matters, and we need your help. Despite years of momentum and incredible legislative efforts by many, implementation in schools across the state is still lagging due to lack of understanding of the role of our therapy disciplines, a disconnect between regulatory mandates, confusion on best practice under this law, and truly administrative burdens. And so here it is, a call to action. If you are a school-based occupational therapist, I have a few propositions for you. A big ask. Contact your representatives and encourage them to work to align the OT Practice Act language with the Medicaid to school policy language regarding our need for a referral source. To make this easy for you, I've hyperlinked these all so that you might be able to easily contact a representative, contact a senator, and make your voice heard. A more medium ask is to be an everyday advocate. Meet with your school administration to understand how Medicaid to schools is being implemented in your district. Here, you'll see AOTA's live link, which links to strategies to be this everyday advocate, to spread the word and to tell your story. Finally, if you need a smaller ask at this time, consider joining the NHOTA's Legislative Committee. Your input and insight would be valuable to policy change in our state. Again, a live link to NHOTA's legislative updates. Here you'll see Medicaid to schools, many, many links of what we're doing to improve this at the state level. If you are not a school-based occupational therapist, but instead a related school-based healthcare provider, such as a PT, or SLP, or behavioral therapist, continue to be an everyday advocate. That's my ask of you. Meet with your school administration to understand how Medicaid to schools is being implemented in your district for your profession. Consider the following. What are the guidelines around provision of service? Do I need an order to do my job? Does the law align with your State Practice Act? A few things for you to consider as you look to make change. I look forward to collaborating with you and welcome any questions or thoughts. Please reach out. Thank you for your time and thank you for your consideration. Go make a change.